Hello and welcome to the 26th Annual Get Lit Festival. I'm Kate Peterson, Director of Get Lit Programs, a nonprofit organization housed within Eastern Washington University. Our program is responsible for Get Lit, Washington State's longest-running annual literary festival, which hosts readings, writing workshops, craft classes, panel discussions, and more, featuring many talented writers from our region and beyond. The festival takes place this Thursday through Sunday, April 11th through the 14th, in many venues across downtown Spokane and Cheney. And of course, we're very happy to be back with you in this virtual space as well. You can find a full schedule of in-person and virtual events, along with information about all of our festival authors by visiting our website, getlitfestival.org. Now I'd like to introduce GetLit's Assistant Coordinator, Liz Graves, who will tell us about today's event.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for Poetry and the Power of Translation. Today, we will be hearing from poets and translators Carolyne Wright, Eugenia Toledo, Christopher Teuton, and Ishmael Hope. Translating languages, especially Indigenous languages, is essential to cultural understanding and preserving knowledge. This panel will show the power of translation and introducing audiences to foreign words and languages through poetry. Now, Kate will introduce Ishmael, who will lead today's conversation.
Thank you, Liz. Ishmael Hope recently published Rock Piles Along the Eddy. Ishmael will be leading today's conversation, which will begin with short introductions from all of today's poets, Carolyne, Christopher, and Eugenia. Please welcome Ishmael.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Elizabeth, and to the Get Lit Festival. I feel wonderful being a part of this very fine literary, scholarly conversation that we're going to have. And I just wanted to start off with a little bit of my language on my father's side, Tlingit. Gunulchish takat Johan, Shao Daneke, Anyat Kusani. Achiyu Khatankaya ye to Saknuch. Yewe hinawa sa ya kelchne deach ialti tu ye weslukach sha Achi yu Khatankaya yewe tu ye ti ya ye dat ye huk ha ye gunalchish takat Johan. And I was saying, thank you, honorable people, self-respecting people. It is song speech. That is what my elder, Nora Downhour Khaagwáask of the Tlingit clan, that's what she called poetry. And that's what I'm thinking right now and what I'm feeling just sitting among you all. So I appreciate being here. And I think my introduction was good. I have everyone's books, and I just want to encourage everyone to get those books. You know, we're recording this, we're showing this to people. Christopher Teuton's amazingly written, edited book, Cherokee Stories of the Turtle Island Liars Club, with Christopher is a member of the Cherokee Nation. And it's great to meet you, Christopher. We've never actually talked, but I've long admired your book. And the elders that he worked with, Hastings Shade, Sammy Still, Sequoia Guess, and Woody Hanson. I thought that these elders are some of the finest oral literary artists that were of their time, contemporary times. Some have gone on, I believe. Maybe some are still alive. And I'd love to hear just any of your thoughts about working with them, about translation, about your working with your culture, your intellectual tradition, all of that. And Carolyne Wright's Masquerade. I'm getting acquainted with your work, and I just appreciate the lyricism, the slices of life. And Eugenia Toledo's map traces, blood traces, or in Spanish, Trazas de mapa, Trazas de sangre, and translated by Carolyne Wright. So you know, and while I'm here just part of this fun conversation, I'm getting a kick on German literature, Friedrich Schiller and Goethe. I don't have the book right here, but Conversations with Goethe, and all of his musings on Lord Byron and Schiller and creating theater and his love for English poetry, you know, all those things, and the constant work of being a literary artist. And I mentioned by email to the group, maybe the finest or just my most enjoyable reading may be Euripides' Iphigenia at Aulis, translated by W.S. Merwin and George E. Dimrock Jr. And that's the kind of, hopefully, a prompt for discussion as we get along and after we introduce ourselves. But that Iphigenia at Aulis, with a poet who also translates, W.S. Merwin, and a scholar of the language, ancient Greek, it just resonates. It takes you there. You think of the sacrifice of Iphigenia and all those conflicts in that ancient archaic way of being. And Merwin, in a talk as he was United States Poet Laureate, he was talking about how he was advised by Ezra Pound to translate, especially during fallow periods of writing. And that has worked for me in translating Tlingit, learning a whole other intellectual tradition that's also happens to be my own, that I grew up in, you know. So that may be a part of a prompt of just the work of literary art and how translating can help you, and reading translations and other world literatures may help you with your work and your outlook, your perspective, and just the art of living. So yeah, I think we can, you know, maybe just go down along who's to introduce ourselves. Maybe we could start with Christopher and continue with Carolyne and then Eugenia, and then go into a conversation from there. If that sounds good with you all. Gunchish, Khaagwáask.
What on, Ishmael? What a pleasure to meet you. What a pleasure to meet you. And thanks for your kind words about the Turtle Island Liars Club book. It was a labor of love for sure. And I'm happy to talk more about it and translation in relation to it, and literary art and oral traditional art. So there's so much to say. So I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. I'll start with just a short introduction and speak a little bit of Cherokee language. Sionagad, Nois Tuisti Dagwadoa Ale Chalagia Yetli Dagwena Sha'i. Just said, hello, everyone. My name's Nois Tuisti. That's my Cherokee name. English name is Chris Teuton. A citizen of the Cherokee Nation, a member of a Chota-Tennessee ceremonial grounds in Park Hill, Oklahoma. I'm a professor and chair of the Department of American Indian Studies here at University of Washington in Seattle and Coast Salish Territory, and have the pleasure of teaching literature, being a literary scholar by training, but having been in academia for a little while and getting tenure, I started to get called back to home to do a lot more work with language revitalization and perpetuating our storytelling traditions. And that's where my heart is now in doing some of this work. Really, kind of literature, of course, will always be close to my heart, and working and teaching in literature. But really, the stories that I'm hearing nowadays, then and have the privilege of working with elders to sometimes record, sometimes just share in community, and to teach here at the University of Washington is just a really wonderful experience. I just got finished teaching a class with the Nextlalam elder Roger Fernandez, a class just focused on Indigenous storytelling. And we would share stories in every class period, and Roger would share Coast Salish traditions, and had over 130 students in that class who are interested in oral arts and the beauty of that language, which is poetic, right? And the way in which we tell stories and share stories. There's a fluidity and continuity between these different forms that we who work in storytelling and literature share. So it's a joy to be part of that, and I'm really excited to speak and hear from you all about your own work in translation. So that's just a little bit about myself. So once again, great to meet you all.
Araga. That's very fine. Right on. That's wonderful. So Carolyne, if you can introduce yourself and join the conversation as well.
Absolutely. Well, hello, everybody. Thank you very much for being here. And I would say that probably my ancestral language would be English, given my heritage, and maybe some German. But well, I'll speak some English. I'll do that. But I can say in Spanish, estoy muy agradecida de estar aquí con ustedes. Bienvenidos a todos a esta presentación de la poesía en traducción. So there's my sort of Chileanized Spanish, as Eugenia would attest. I hope to meet you, Christopher, at some point, because I live here in Seattle. I am a native of Seattle, born in Bellingham, but I've spent much of my life here in the Coast Salish, unceded territories. And I've been a translator much of the time, and I agree that translation is a wonderful way to learn poetry, and also to learn very closely the voice and the just the basic sensibility of the poet or the poets that you are working on, or that in this case what I'm working on. So I feel that I've become very close to Eugenia's work in translating her, at least this book, Trazas de mapa, Trazas de sangre, or map traces, blood traces. I have translated from Spanish. I've done an earlier book by the Chilean poet Jorge Teillier, which was published by the University of Texas Press, and it's still in print. It's amazing. I've also done work from Bengali, which is a very different language. It's still an Indo-European language, but it's one of those Indo-European languages that found its way into the subcontinent of South Asia. So I've done a few books of translation, 3 books from Bengali, and I'm also working now in Portuguese, Brazilian Portuguese. So I am, shall we say, literally all over the map. But I have spent a lot of time teaching in various parts of the country, and my degrees are from Seattle University and master's and doctorate from Syracuse. But I also did an all but thesis, can that exist, from the University of Washington, and it would be in what is now called Spanish and Portuguese. Who knows, maybe I'll finish that degree at some point. I'll just do I'll present the next book of poetry in translation, maybe from Portuguese, maybe from Spanish, and say, okay, here's my thesis, give me the degree, way after the fact. But I'm so happy to work with Eugenia when we were both within the city limits of Seattle. We would take the bus downtown, Eugenia coming from West Seattle and me coming from North Seattle, and we would meet in our, nuestra cueva, as we called it. At first, it was the basement of Elliott Bay Books, when Elliott Bay Books was in Pioneer Square, and we would work on the translations of map traces and some other projects we were involved with. And so that was wonderful, and we got that done. So that's enough about me. I'm going to be here in Seattle. I also have to finish my most recent Fulbright U.S. Scholar Award, which took me to Salvador Bahia, and I was there for 2 months in 2022, and I'm going to go back for the second 2 months a little bit later this year. So yeah, so that's enough about me. So I want to hear more from Eugenia.
Oh, no.
Te toca a ti, Eugenia.
Bueno, what can I say? so many things. It's an honor being here with you guys, Professor Christopher, Chris, and Ishmael, to get to see you, and Kate and Liz.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for. Well, it's Carolyne Wright's fault. She pushed me. I am retired, and I feel I work from home, and I have been with a bad health almost all the time that I have been here now. But since the sun is there, I feel so good. I feel better. The good weather. And my last 11 years after my father passed away, I remain in Chile, back in Chile. I have been many times there. I emigrated to United States in 1975 to teach language at the Department of Romance Language at University of Washington. I got my master's degree in Latin American literature and then in Spanish literature with Dr. George Shipley. And they were 8 fantastic years. And then I went also in the 80s, the worst time of the dictatorship. I went back to Chile, and it was very hard, but I learned a lot of things because it was the time, as I said, of Pinochet. It was very hard to work at the university during that time. And then my husband and I, we could not remain there, and we came back to the States. And now I live on the mountain, looking at Mount Pilchuck here in Washington State, and up really high in Sultan. So the way you go roads to Spokane, I believe, And Carolyne pushed me, says, Eugenia, we have to do this, we have to do that. Okay, and I appreciate that. I think I met Carolyne in 2005 at the Richard Hugo House. I went to see her, I read about her. I said, oh, this is an interesting woman. And we became friends. And then we traveled together to Chile from north to south in 2008, which was a very good thing for me to get acquaintance with people I knew in the 70s, 73, and then that trip generates map traces, blood traces, remembering what happened in especially the years of 70 to 73. I have to say that it's an epoch that is pretty much remembered in Chile and by us, the old people. The young sometimes don't even want to know what happened, and they prefer not to look at history, but some of us that fortunately we're still alive, we can write the story, the history, and discuss things and study what happened. And we see Chile today as a result of that pain. Yeah, it's not only Violeta Parra's Arauco. Arauco is the territory of the Mapuche indigenous people, has a pain, tiene una pena, but todo Chile has a pain, a huge pain. Similar sometimes to what I have seen. Recently I went to Europe, and I went to Central Europe, and those people, they really have a trauma like us. in the South Cono, en el Cono Sur. As different sorts of pain, wars and wars and wars, still a war over there, now a war over here, etc. So similar things, you know. So it was very rich to be the year there for 11 years lately. I work with, especially with women. I concentrate even at my age. I started working, I got out, and I work with Mapuche women, and I work with seniors. I did the best I could. I wrote a book because the pandemic happened, and I stayed there at the Kaburwe Lake, Indian village, and I stayed there 2 years, isolated with my husband. And then I started explore prose and theater. At the present times, I write theater for a group of women in Pucón, Chile, and I'm fascinated by it. I found that it was a good way to tell stories, women's stories, and using performance, and fascinated. I learned a lot about women and my own life, you know, review. That is the richness of become old, to look at behind me, said, wow, I did this, should have done that, etc. I was fascinated to compare and talk to women that listen. It's very good. So Carolyne and I, we work a lot in map traces, blood traces. I have to say that I met lots of translators. I have to say that the perfect translator is Carolyne Wright. She, be proud, because I still read the poetry that you translate. And I said, wow, you know, but we collaborate. We were really, really close. So I learned about translations also with her because of the experience of translating this book. And the best things was for her to, she was in Chile during the time of Salvador Allende, so she knew a part of what she can imagine easily what could happen, and it happened. Yeah, I think that's me.
Beautiful. Gracias,
Eugenia.
Wonderful to hear about people's intellectual histories. And I wish we just had all kinds of time just to digest everything and share.
Really, yeah.
But one thing I'm hoping that we can get to within the limited time we have is if you all can share something from your, and then maybe we can have a few minutes to just process or discuss those things. And perhaps I could start off just to get it going. I would like to read from Joe Hotch, Khaagwáask Shu, and he's an elder who just passed away last year. And there was something called the Clan Conference, and it's a thing that my dad, Andy Hope III, organized, where academics and storytellers would come and just share their knowledge. And it started since 1993. And Joe Hotch, every time he'd give a beautiful, beautiful Tlingit speech. So I'd just like to go right into it. I had it up, but I'm getting back to it. So here it is. He shared this at the 2009 Sharing Our Knowledge, and Eugenia talking about trauma, surviving dictatorships, all those things. And just, I just, by the way, I adore that intellectual history of Pablo Neruda and Spanish writing poets. Federico Garcia Lorca is my, I just, he's my icon, for literature, and Pablo
Same
Neruda
here.
as well.
Yes.
And that'd be a reason to learn Spanish, actually, just to be with those poets. But just the talking about the trauma, Joe Hotch in Tlingit talks about how he was punished for speaking Tlingit. And so I think it's kind of appropriate to share that speech and then the translation. So I'll just go into it. And maybe I'll share a passage, translate. Gunalchi shanyat kusani, ya yi guk ha dayin yi saat. Ya ha kusti ha yukatangi, adeha ich kududli regye. Ayah twasigu adachach datani, jaye gowat. Shukwanach, skuch yukatu tangi linget renach. Usa in awe, du usk, halut, wushadzi. Thank you, honorable people, with your ears that you've brought before us. Our way of life and our language, the way it was forbidden from us, that is what I would like to speak about for a little bit. In the beginning, we would speak in the Tlingit language at school. They would wash our tongues with soap. It was difficult. Bunayeda ha sech ach ketchkandach ach oe ka yakak atsku. Tlingit yuchatangi achawewe teacher chkanto at he. Ya kusi art woodly tichwe pipe. A cock away with oot. Yan would do a tea. Ach woodly teach. A de ha yaw do a ji ya ha yuchatangi. From when they began, they heard us from Ketchikan. There were boys there. They spoke Tlingit. That is why the teacher was angry. There was a cold, frozen pipe. They put their tongues on it. It became frozen. That is the way they disciplined us with our language. Aya tleika shawak dach ach ya shawat yeshkatnik du tla ye yaw du ji du skuch Tlingit chenach yukatangi. Achaya tleth adut saya uatu we yukatank. Tuhutsu yan du jeka. Achaya hatlatsini ha yukatangi. Achlich yechat ya sikha. Yukatangi yakit likati ikusti uchkekati. Achaya yidat yahayatki hadatshankiyan hayatlet kaksatiya to hasayanatlak. Nathliye gachtu art, nathliye gachtu art, uch tincha yisiti. One from Khaagwáask heard it. That Ketchikan and Khaagwáask are towns in Southeast Alaska. This woman told her mother that they disciplined them at their school for speaking the Tlingit language. That is why no one taught the language. She too, to prevent them from being disciplined. That is why our language is truly our strength. My grandfather told me, when you lose your language, your life will be harmed. That is why now our children, our grandchildren, and those who are succeeding, those who are white people, they too are succeeding. We will go far. We will go far when we are together with you. And again, with the time, I'll end there with this speech. But I think that's perhaps a continual, there's just these more prompts that we're putting with our intellectual lineages to share of ourselves and our backgrounds and the intellectual lives of our region, and how we connect with world literatures as well. So if we can continue on, it seemed like that order we had seemed to flow nicely. So if we can ask Chris, if you want to share something of your translation or your writing, anything you'd like.
Sure. Wow, wow. That was beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing your language. That was
Cheesh.
really good to hear. I think about myself as a translator. I'm a little sheepish about that because I'll say, I'm a second language learner of Cherokee language. Cherokee language, like, geez, I guess I would say nearly all indigenous languages of North America, is an endangered language. We have approximately 2,000 fluent speakers of Cherokee. But as we teach in our tradition, and as I've been taught by elders, we all have a role to play. We all have a role to play in our communities. And so my role has been to be able to, the honor of working with some community members on language revitalization, on sharing out those stories. And so this current book that I just completed, well, it's been a year now, actually published last March. It's called Cherokee Earth Dwellers. I can hold it up, Stories and Teachings of the Natural World. And in the center of that book is an archive of over 600 different names for creatures of the natural world in Cherokee language. It's the largest collection that really exists, and was collected by the elder Hastings Shade, my posthumous co-author of the book. He would go and meet other elders. He always kept a little notebook in his breast pocket, and when he'd meet with other elders, he'd write down words. He'd say, we're going to go compare notes and see what our grandmas knew or grandparents knew, and he'd write those down, and then he'd compile them over many years, over decades. And so after he passed on, I began to work with his widow, Loretta Shade, and Loretta and I worked closely for years on getting this book out. But when we looked at it, we were like, it's not just a collection of names for the natural world. It's actually like there's stories and teachings all along with those creatures. So it's a really kind of an storied world, but a world that honors our relations through naming. And so language is a part of that, and translating not just words, and working with Loretta, a fluent speaker, Cherokee National Treasure for her language teaching, but with a lot of other community members I worked with in getting those translations of those words down. But then, of course, translating across cultures, explaining concepts and ideas that are grounded in the language, but with writing a book that goes back and forth between Cherokee and English, there's a need to do that work. And that's, I feel like, one of the roles that I was able to play in this work, is to try to help translate the teachings that Hastings and Loretta and all the contributors of the book want to put forward to community, whether they're fluent language speakers, people who grew up traditionally, or people who grew up outside our culture, or non-Cherokee folks, to do the translation across to teach, to share out. And that was the impulse behind this work. But at the heart of it always is language. So I want to read just a short little section by Hastings Shade that's called Ukten and Awahali. Ukten's one of our cultural figures. It's a mythical creature, the horned serpent. And Awahali is eagle. And I'd just like you to listen for how this is a traditional story, but it's also a story that speaks to our present in terms of perpetuating our language and our way of life. In Cherokee, we say, we have our language and our fire, kind of two direct gifts from Unehlana, our creator. And if we lose either of those, we lose our sense of self. We lose our identity as a people. So language revitalization and perpetuation, as we like to say, is of the utmost importance to Cherokee Nation and Cherokee people today. So it's a short piece, but I'll just read this to you. Long ago, there was a battle between Ukten, or flying dragon, and Awahali, or eagle. The battle lasted for many generations, but the Ukten never defeated Awahali. Just about the time Ukten would start to get the best of Awahali, the Awahali would fly higher and higher until at last Ukten fell back to earth, defeated. The Ukten represents the white culture, and Awahali represents Indian culture. The Ukten couldn't compete with Awahali's ability to fly high, his ability to adapt. This is why the eagle is known to fly the highest of any bird to this day. The ability to adapt represents the Indian's ability to use the white man's language and teaching to his own good. The dragon falling represents the white culture's inability to adapt to the Indian culture. The Indian can live in the white man's culture. This is demonstrated by how most all Indians can speak and understand the white language, and only a few whites can speak or understand the Indian language and culture. At the time the flying dragon fell was when the Indians began to learn to read and understand the white language. So that's just that little short story that's been passed along through generations. And I present it the way Hastings told it to me, unadulterated, unchanged. Just want to share a little bit about the importance of language and adaptation and cultural perpetuation. So I'll let Carolyne or Eugenia take it from here. Thank you.
And I just want to say, that's what they say when they hear a really good story. Wow, that was a good story. That's
Yes. Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Christopher, and thank you so much, Ishmael. Muchísimas gracias por las historias que ustedes han contado. I think what Eugenia and I, because I did just get your email message that came 45 minutes into our hour here, asking us to read something in the original and then in English translation. So I think that would be a great thing to do. Now, Eugenia and I have translated each other, but I think what I'd like to do here is first begin with the poem of Eugenia's, and then read the English translation, because I think one of the most, for me, and I really appreciate your kind words about my ability as a translator. For me, the key thing with translating is to present the work in the target language, which in this case would be English, because generally a translator is going to be translating from another language into his or her own native language, her first language. And so I tend to translate from Bengali, Portuguese, Spanish into English, although it has gone the other way more recently. But I always get help from native speakers if I'm going to be translating from English into another language. But my main endeavor, my main focus when I'm translating is to try to render the original work in English so as to create in English the same effect that it has in the original, which in this case would be Spanish, so that the when you're reading it, you can see through the English to the original Spanish. And that is very important. I don't want to render it as if it had been written in English, but somehow where the English becomes kind of a clear film or filter, so that the quality of the original Spanish shines through. So that's my main goal as a translator. So the translator has to be, in a way, sort of invisible, but kind of like a clear film through which the original language passes. So I was thinking, Eugenia, since we've been talking about indigenous languages and indigenous culture and languages as the carriers of culture, I think it would be wonderful to read one of the poems that has to do with the fact that the area where Eugenia is from in Chile is La Araucanía, or the region of the Mapuche people, that's the main cultural tribe, the main group in the south of Chile, and continues to be a very strong presence to this day in the south of Chile, south of the Biobío River especially. So what do you think we read Mapuche Mercado Municipal, and then I'll read the English. ¿Qué tal, Eugenia?
Sí, but I have some questions to you, Carolyne, related to me, more and more, I believe in it's very important, the competence of the translator, I think. And that is based on knowing the language,
yes,
the linguistic part, right? That it takes you to the style, because that transparency I believe that you will never, nobody will translate, will translate a piece of work, a text, as it is. I think there, when I look at my map traces, blood traces, here there are 2 books to me, okay? He knew about the cultural part, she knew the language, and there were all the human challenges that we had to jump over to translate this. I think translation is not an easy task. And I have met people who don't even speak the languages they're translating books right now. And that scares me, you know. Imagine, and poetry is very difficult to translate. I think it's the syntaxis, la syntaxis, the syntactic, the phonology, the lyrical part, the stylistic part, the semantic. Each little word. People think the Spanish is very easy language, but I tell you, you study one word in Spanish, it has, I don't know how many meanings. And in these days, when you go to Latin America, each country of ours is speaking a different Spanish.
Yeah, different vocabulary.
Vocabulario, and they are inventing languages.
Yeah,
This is amazing.
Yeah.
The evolution of the language, you know. The Real Academia Española really tried really hard to say this is the standard Spanish, and write and we need to write in standard Spanish, you know. If not, right? Sometimes I talk to a Mexican and I have problems, you know, what he said to me, or a person from Ecuador, you know. It's very interesting. Yeah. It's very interesting. A little example. We never call a person in Chile with the article. La Carolina, El Christopher, El Ismael, La Katy, and La Liz. For if I said that, I objectivized you. You are an object to me. But I go to Mexico and everybody saying, La Eugenia this, La Eugenia that. I say, why La Eugenia? Oh, it's esta, this Eugenia. Oh, what this Eugenia said. Yeah. Wow. And that is part of still our colonization. Yeah. That we are in our countries, there are a lot of study about our language and the colonization on our language. Because one is masculine. Men impose the language. And then there is the evolution, right? So we need to study etymology also. A translator need to know, today, a translator should know that the word victim in French has a gender. In English, you guys don't have a gender, but we do. And you have to be so careful. There are words that are masculine and take an article in feminino. Víctima is femenina, right? Only femenina. So there are no men, there are victims. Who has been in the history of humanity more victim than men? Nobody. They are victims. Victimas, we say. This is amazing. It passed on me. So interesting. The language from the cultural part of the language drives me nuts, and I love it. I love it, you know. I have learned that
I would say
the Bible is not well translated either, you know?
Yeah.
From Arameo to other languages, we are not from una costilla, from bone, Adam's bone. We were to his side, costado, no costilla.
Okay.
The new studies and linguistics are saying that. So, wow, for centuries, the colonization of language, one culture, one, so Babel, wow, was suppression, really, one person to another, linguistically speaking. When I published my last book about Khaagwáask, I titled my book Khaagwáask, which it means a spoon, a lake that has the form on a tiny spoon. The Mapuche Indians eat the apple with a spoon, wooden spoon, the raspan, you know. You eat with, like you wear your apple, la manzana, a couple, so the raspan, usan a spoon. And the lake has the form of the spoon. So
why don't we, Eugenia, why don't we read the poem, because I think we're getting a little short on time.
To say this. I want to continue. I'm sorry I'm taking so much time. Made a point that the evolutions of the indigenous language is very important too, because I use the word Khaagwáask from the first dictionary in Mapuche, Ishmael. And a young Mapuche came to my talk and said, that's not the way you write Khaagwáask. We write it this way. Right. Okay, I stop. I'm going to read the poema very quickly.
And I'm going to say one quick thing. Oh, no, why don't you read it, Eugenia, and then I'll say one quick thing. Okay, then I'll read it in English. Okay.
Oh, gracias. This is the public market in my hometown. Most of the people who sell their things there, they were indigenous people. It also sold food, fish, things from their market, and lots of craft in artesanía. The Mercado Municipal burned to pieces about 7 years ago. Doesn't exist anymore. So there's nothing there. And we lost it. And it was from the beginning of the century. That's terrible. Absolutely terrible. Anyway, the women came, Mapuche women came and sit outside of the market or in the entrance to sell little things like ripe berries, like food, like bread that they did and on earth, on ashes, etc. So the woman will say, caserita, how are you, caserita? How are you? Maki, Maki, Maki Maduro ofrece al aproximarse canasto de aroma y verduras. Mercado de Temuco, chamal y cintas de colores, tu piel ciudadana. ¿Qué vende, señora? I ask. Murtilla y avellana, moras maduras, manojo de quillay, motemei, caserita, motemei. And I said, me devuelve la esperanza, tiñes mi lengua. Con tu maqui maduro, ave fénix, mapuche. Mujer y fogón, madera de canelo, resististe la conquista y la colonia en las historias que escribes en tu telar, entre el árbol y tu cintura, sueños que todavía duermen en tus hilos. Me alegra escucharte, mujer. Me pregunto cómo sobreviviste a las tragedias de los años que trajeron más años, las viejas maneras que trajeron nuevas. Arauco aún vive contigo en esta tierra espigada, nuestra tierra. Our land.
Thank you, Eugenia. Muchísimas gracias. And so I'm going to read the English translation. What I wanted to say is, and Eugenia was saying this as well, that for me as a translator, it's important for me to know the culture, to know the language, to have spent time in the country in which this poetry was written. For example, if somebody asked me to translate a Peruvian poet or, you know, an Uruguayan poet, I'd probably say, you know, I haven't spent enough time in those countries to do that. I don't know all of the, you know, the subtleties and the nuances, the differences of the language. So, you know, maybe you could find somebody who spent time in Uruguay or Paraguay or or Galicia, wherever it might be. So, so here, but I have spent time in Temuco. I've spent, you know, a fair amount of time in Chile. So here is Mapuche, public market. Maqui berries, ripe maqui berries, she offers, approaching me. Basket of scents and vegetables, Temuco's public market. Chamal blanket and brightly colored ribbons, your civic skin. What are you selling, ma'am? Myrtle berries and hazelnuts, bunches of quillay, cooked mote, caserita. You give me hope, stain my tongue with your ripe maqui berry, Mapuche, phoenix, woman and bonfire, cinnamon wood. You resisted the conquest and the colonies. In the stories you write with your loom tied to the tree and your belt, those dreams that still sleep in your threads. I'm happy listening to you, woman. I wonder how you endure the tragedies of the years that brought more years, the old ways that brought new ways. Arauco still lives on in you, in this narrow land, our own land. So.
Beautiful. Araga. Araga.
Thank you so much.
I think we have just time for one more question, but just along those lines of just, I feel in listening to Eugenia's, both in the Spanish and the translation, the fine translation, and the story from Hastings Shade that Christopher shared. It is bringing me back to what I'm thinking about a lot, which is joy and meaning in literature. And being consistent with that, because you could get thrown off by the modern times. Eugenia was talking about how young people don't want to learn history. They don't see what just being with a book can do. They're too scatterbrained, and I can get that way myself. So I'm thinking so much, and I'm talking with my children about joy and meaning in literature. So just my simple question is, what is your joy? What's your experience of joy and meaning with the work of translation? And we can go in the same order, or we can break it up. You know, whoever wants to jump in and start.
Well, I guess we can keep the same order. I'll just jump ahead. That's a huge question, Ishmael. But I'm glad you asked it. It's a good question. It's a great question.
Yeah, that's it.
I think, you know, I'm reflecting on teaching with my colleague, Roger Fernandez, this past quarter here at UW. And Roger would often comment to our students that so much of what happens at a university is of the head. It's of logic and reason and rationality and science and all these other things, which are all important. But our stories and work in translation, I mean, it really is about the heart, about those things that speak to the heart. And if we lose touch with that, you know, we're of the head and of the heart. And Roger was explaining Coast Salish traditions here that there's teachings for the head and there's teachings for the heart. And the stories and poetry and song, you know, are all part of teachings to the heart. And the older I get, the more important I think that is, you know, the work that speaks to the heart, and a work of a book, you know, that puts things down into writing. You know, sometimes people will think that that's locking in tradition and becomes static and unchanging. But in my experience, it actually is just another form for it to take blossom out again into oral tradition, into song. So I think that's one of the powers that gives me joy as in my small role that I have within my community to perpetuate our teachings and our language, the names we have for the natural world that allow us to open a door to relating to our other than human relatives, knowing their names and the way in which we've related to them. It's an invitation to those teachings of the heart and to finding that balance between the head and the heart that I think in the world today is really a challenge to have. And so that's what gives me joy is to when I see it take root and I see people learning and growing and really nourished by story, and that I had a small part in shepherding that along into the world.
Yeah, I just want to mention super quick, I was close friends with Saul Neely, who was a member of Cherokee Nation and a scholar of Levinas and a PhD and English professor here. He sadly passed away 2 years ago, but he has talked about. I talked about this book. He got the Cherokee's stories of the Turtle Island Liars Club, and he told me just he spent a lot of time away from his culture and then got back into it. And then he told me that it's life-saving doing this stuff. So
yeah, Saul was a friend. It was a terrible loss. So
yeah, wanted to just mention him and the memory of him. And
yeah, what else?
Well, I guess I can just say what gives me joy in translating is, many things. But one thing is I love working with living poets, living writers with whom I can communicate, hopefully face to face, as Eugenia and I have done over the years, and just working together, sitting at the same table. And because there's just wonderful conversation that you can enter into about the work that's in front of you, but also the conversation goes down many different paths and connecting connecting threads. And so that is wonderful, and that's been wonderful for me. I've been really fortunate to be able to do that in 3 different languages. And then also Eugenia and I, Eugenia translated some of my own work into English, and we probably don't have time to go into that, but she translated my work from English to Spanish. And I love reading what I said about the language being a film through which you can see the original language. I felt that reading one of the poems that Eugenia had translated of mine. And as I read through it, I can hear the original English through the Spanish into which Eugenia has translated it. And so and so what she has translated of my work is the work that is based in Latin America, in Chile, having to do with Pablo Neruda, or having to do with the Sierra, with the, poetry written in Chile about Chile. And so that's been really, that's been a wonderful gift, and, an opening of insight. So yeah, that's my joy.
yeah, very good.
Well, literature is my passion. All my life I lived studying. I was the only child. I was lonely, and I loved silence and to live in isolation. And I think that is what we can give to young people, our passion. See if they perceive the passion that you have for literatura and what it expresses, and to learn, to teach them to think, to teach them to learn things.
Wow.
Yes. Yeah, to think, because looks to me that the major part, not about young people at the university, But in my country, universities are very wary, like here, I know for other people who work at university, they are wary of different things. And you could get lost in there and very isolated also. And they do not reach the community. So the big part of the people get floating, you know, la masa, el populacho. The people, it's not a university that they get up in the morning, go to work all day, come back home, watch TV, and they do the same thing again and again and again. And they don't have them in our countries the way to meet, you know. So it is difficult. Culture is very difficult today. And to teach culture is difficult also. To, you know, people get interested on it. Who reads poetry? Yeah.
I'm just hearing about how engagement could help people. And just as you're talking, I'm thinking of what helped the artists of before is often a friendship. Federico Garcia, Pablo Neruda, just loving each other, writing odes to each other, and those conversations and dialogues that the poets have had. And so just that you both as poets, thinking about that, and Christopher with his elders, like that there's something about that where the connection and the being with each other and sharing gives an alternate experience than what you just described, which most of us have, of the all day go to work and then watch TV at home, you know?
Yeah, the routine of life, right? Domestic life, women and men.
Okay.
Right.
I'm just seeing a note that we should wrap it up, and I just appreciate everyone's time. There's one thing I wanted to mention is Douglas Indian Association. It's a local tribe here. They're the ones that support my contract me to make these translations, which are used as curriculum resources. So it's a gift to have patronage for this kind of work, and you know, hearing from you all in the places you've worked as well, the universities and publishers and all those things. That's just very important. So just wanted to mention that, but also just everyone in your time. I value I'm grateful to you all. I feel good within myself towards you all. So I think we should it's time for us to end this conversation. So hooch away. That's the end.
It will continue beyond the frame of this discussion, right? It goes on.
Yeah, that'll be.
Benadago on you.
Yes, thank you
Masquerade.
all.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ishmael.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Eugenia. Thank you, Carolyne. It was really great to hear from you all and to learn more about you and your work. So thank you for sharing your experiences and your languages with us. Even though we didn't get to very many questions, I think we did learn quite a lot from you all through your readings and discussion of those readings. So thank you for those. And your books will be available at the festival. So we hope that everyone will pick one up from Auntie's Bookstore when they get here to Spokane. I would also like to thank Get Lit's Assistant Coordinator Liz Graves for helping with this event and so many others throughout the festival. To find our full schedule and more information about the writers that you met here today, please visit our website, getlitfestival.org. Thank you again for joining us, everybody. Goodbye.
Thank you, Kate.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.